"Hush, it'll be our little secret. Promise me you won't tell anyone," said the alien girl. Steve White had seen his fair share of unusual situations during his years as a diplomatic security officer, but nothing quite prepared him for what happened on the Stellar Nexus station. The massive space station, hovering at the crossroads of three major galactic civilizations, was supposed to be just another assignment. Instead, it became the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The station's chrome and titanium corridors reflected the soft blue lighting, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere as Steve made his rounds. His black armored suit, standard issue for human security personnel, felt particularly heavy today. Maybe it was the artificial gravity, or maybe it was the way that violet-skinned alien woman kept looking at him. He'd noticed her during the morning's diplomatic session, while the various species representatives droned on about trade agreements and territorial disputes. She stood guard near the Centaurian delegation. Her own black armor marked her as security, but there was something different about her. The way she carried herself, the subtle grace in her movements, and those eyes. Deep purple orbs that seemed to catch his gaze whenever he looked her way. "Focus, White," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his short brown hair. "You're here to work, not daydream about alien women." The station's evening cycle was beginning, and the corridors were gradually emptying as various species retired to their quarters. Steve continued his patrol, checking the maintenance access points and security stations as per protocol. The soft hum of the station's life support systems provided a constant background noise, almost lulling him into a sense of routine. That's when it happened. A shadow moved in his peripheral vision. Before he could fully turn, a strong hand gripped his arm, and he found himself being pulled into a maintenance closet. The door hissed shut behind him, and in the dim emergency lighting, he found himself face to face with the violet-skinned woman who'd been occupying his thoughts. "Shh." She pressed a finger to his lips, her violet eyes twinkling with mischief. "This will be our little secret. Promise you won't tell anyone." Up close, she was even more striking. Her black hair, tied in a neat ponytail, seemed to absorb what little light there was. Her features were almost human, save for the subtle violet hue of her skin and the faint luminescent markings that traced delicate patterns along her temples. "I'm Lixia," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "And you, Steve White, have been driving me to distraction all day." "How do you know my name?" he managed to ask, though his heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with potential security threats. She smiled, a predatory expression that sent shivers down his spine. "I make it my business to know everything about interesting humans who catch my eye, especially ones who look at me the way you do." Before he could formulate a response, she kissed him. Her lips were surprisingly soft, and any thoughts of protocol or proper procedure evaporated like morning dew under a binary sun. What followed was a passionate encounter that left them both breathless and disheveled. Later, as they straightened their armor and tried to look presentable, Steve finally found his voice again. "Now, this isn't exactly standard diplomatic procedure." Lixia laughed, a musical sound that made his heart skip. "Oh, I think we're well past standard procedures, don't you?" She checked her appearance in the reflective surface of a maintenance panel. "Besides, sometimes the best diplomacy happens outside official channels." "Is that what this was? Diplomacy?" He raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain some semblance of professional dignity. "This was whatever we want it to be." She winked at him. "But for now, it's our secret. The Centaurian High Council wouldn't exactly approve of one of their elite guards fraternizing with a human security officer." Steve frowned. "Elite guard? I thought you were just regular security." "Oh, darling," she purred. "There's nothing regular about me. But that's also part of our secret." She pressed another quick kiss to his lips before slipping out of the closet, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the lingering scent of something exotic and alien. Little did Steve know that this encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about interspecies relations, diplomacy, and his own place in the galaxy. The next few days on Stellar Nexus became an intoxicating dance of pure physical attraction. Steve found his thoughts constantly drifting to memories of violet skin and those predatory eyes. Every corridor held the possibility of another encounter with Lixia. Every quiet corner, another opportunity to satisfy their mutual hunger. During diplomatic sessions, they maintained perfect professional composure, though the raw tension between them was electric. Lixia would catch his eye across the conference room, her violet lips curving into a smile that promised nothing but pleasure. Steve would respond with an almost imperceptible nod, their silent communication purely primal. One evening, during a particularly dull trade negotiation, Steve's personal communicator buzzed with an encrypted message. Security cameras in Block C7 need maintenance. 20 minutes. His body responded instantly as he recognized Lixia's security clearance code. The maintenance excuse became their favorite pretense. As elite guard, Lixia had access to the station's security systems that even Steve, with his human diplomatic credentials, couldn't match. She would create brief, blind spots in the surveillance network, nothing suspicious enough to trigger alarms, but enough to give them precious moments of privacy. Their rendezvous grew bolder, driven purely by physical need. Sometimes it was a quick encounter in a darkened corridor, other times a longer meeting in his quarters, where Lixia had indeed found ways to loop the security feeds. The thrill of possibly being discovered only heightened their raw attraction. "You humans," Lixia purred during one of their encounters in his quarters, her violet fingers trailing across his chest. "Your bodies are absolutely intoxicating, so different from Centaurian males." Steve pulled her closer, his breath hot against her neck. "And you Centaurians? What other surprises are you hiding?" She laughed, a sound full of carnal promise. "Oh, darling, you have no idea. My people consider physical pleasure an art form. What we're doing now, it's purely educational." Their game of cat and mouse took an interesting turn during a formal diplomatic function. The station's grand hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all dressed in their finest ceremonial attire. Lixia wore a flowing dress that left little to imagination, while Steve was in his formal diplomatic uniform. Throughout the evening, they maintained their distance, but their eyes kept meeting across the crowded room. The formal setting only heightened their physical tension. Every time they passed each other, there was an almost magnetic pull, a primal desire that had to be constantly suppressed. "This is torture," Lixia murmured as they briefly crossed paths near their refreshment table. "That uniform makes me want to drag you into the nearest maintenance shaft." Steve nearly choked on his drink. "Careful," he whispered back. "The Andromedian ambassador is watching." "Let them watch," she replied with undisguised hunger in her eyes. "They wouldn't understand what they're seeing anyway. Andromedians can't comprehend the kind of raw chemistry we have." Later that evening, they managed to slip away from the function, finding refuge in one of their usual meeting spots. The contrast between their formal attire and their clandestine location added an extra layer of excitement to their encounter. "You know," Lixia said afterward, adjusting her dress, "on my world, this kind of physical attraction isn't unusual. Different species, different sensations. It's all about exploring new pleasures." Their meetings were pure adrenaline and desire. No strings attached, no complications, just two beings satisfying their mutual hunger. During their encounters, they spoke little, letting their bodies communicate in a language that needed no translation. The station's artificial day-night cycle became meaningless as they found new times and places to meet. Each encounter was different, yet driven by the same raw need. Sometimes they would barely make it into privacy before their hands were all over each other. Other times they would draw out the anticipation, exchanging heated glances during diplomatic meetings until they could finally steal away. They developed an intricate system of signals and codes, using their security clearances to create private moments throughout the station. A brushed shoulder in a corridor meant maintenance closet, 10 minutes. A particular way of standing during meetings signaled which section of the station would be conveniently free of surveillance that evening. During one particularly heated encounter in a rarely used observation deck, Lixia demonstrated just how flexible Centaurian anatomy could be. Steve found himself wondering how he'd ever found human women exciting after experiencing the unique pleasures his alien lover could provide. Their professional lives remained entirely separate from their physical relationship. During official functions, they were models of diplomatic propriety. Steve continued his security duties with perfect efficiency, while Lixia maintained her position as an elite guard with unwavering professionalism. Only they knew about the marks hidden beneath their formal attire, the secret bruises and scratches that told the story of their passionate encounters. The danger of discovery only added to their excitement. Every close call, every nearly missed security patrol, every hastily straightened uniform only fueled their desire for more. They were playing with fire, and they both knew it, but the burn was too sweet to resist. The line between professional duty and raw desire began to blur dangerously on Stellar Nexus. Steve found himself struggling to maintain composure during high-level diplomatic meetings, especially when Lixia deliberately positioned herself in his direct line of sight. Her subtle movements, the way she shifted her weight from one leg to another, drove him to distraction. The Andromedian Trade Summit proved particularly challenging. Representatives from 17 species gathered to negotiate crucial resource agreements, but Steve could barely focus on the proceedings. Lixia had taken to wearing a modified version of her armor that accentuated every curve while remaining technically within regulations. "Officer White?" Ambassador Thex's gravelly voice snapped him back to attention. "Your assessment of the security protocols?" Steve cleared his throat, forcing his eyes away from Lixia's knowing smirk. "All measures are in place, Ambassador. We've doubled the patrols in sensitive areas and implemented additional scanning procedures." "Excellent," the ambassador nodded, their crystalline features catching the light. "Though I noticed some irregularities in the surveillance logs." Steve's heart rate spiked, but years of diplomatic training kept his expression neutral. Across the room, he noticed Lixia's slight tensing, the only indication that she'd heard the exchange. After the meeting, she cornered him in an empty conference room. "Getting sloppy, are we?" Her violet eyes danced with mischief. "Perhaps we need to be more creative with our rendezvous." "The ambassador's suspicious," Steve growled, his body already responding to her proximity. "We should cool things off." "Oh," she pressed closer, her alien warmth intoxicating. "Is that really what you want?" Their encounters became more daring, more risky. The thrill of almost getting caught only heightened their mutual desire. They found new places to meet, maintenance tunnels, unused storage bays, even the zero-gravity sections of the station where their differences in physiology led to particularly interesting experiences. During one diplomatic reception, Lixia demonstrated just how far she was willing to push their game. She'd positioned herself directly opposite Steve during the formal dinner, and throughout the meal she'd been subtly demonstrating exactly what her centaurian flexibility could accomplish. "Your species continues to fascinate me," she purred later that night in his quarters. "Such intense physical responses, such raw energy. No wonder the galaxy finds humans so intriguing." Their mutual obsession began affecting their work. Steve missed security cues during meetings, his attention divided between duty and desire. Lixia's usually perfect guard stance would falter whenever he passed too close. The physical attraction between them had become a tangible force, drawing concerned glances from other station personnel. The situation came to a head during a high-stakes negotiation between the Centaurian High Council and Earth's diplomatic corps. The tension in the room was already high when Lixia, executing her guard duties, brushed past Steve. The brief contact sent electricity through both of them, and for a fraction of a second, their professional masks slipped, Ambassador Thex noticed. Their crystalline features shifted in what might have been concern or suspicion. "A word, Officer White," the ambassador requested after the session, "regarding station security." Steve followed the ambassador to their private office, aware that his career might be hanging by a thread. But instead of the expected reprimand, Thex surprised him. "Your, interaction with Guard Lixia has not gone unnoticed," the ambassador began, "though perhaps not in the way you fear. The Andromedian people have long studied human physiology, particularly your species' intense physical responses and remarkable adaptability." Steve maintained his diplomatic poker face, though his mind raced with implications. "What Guard Lixia hasn't told you," Thex continued, "is that she was specifically chosen for this assignment. Her unique genetic makeup makes her particularly compatible with human physiology. The High Council has been curious about such interactions." The revelation should have angered him, but instead it only intensified his desire. The idea that their attraction had been partially engineered made it somehow more exotic, more forbidden. When he confronted Lixia about it later, she merely laughed. "Does it matter? The attraction is real, even if the opportunity was arranged." Besides, she traced a finger down his chest. "I've gone far beyond my official brief. You've awakened appetites I didn't know existed." Their encounters became more frequent, more intense. They developed an almost telepathic awareness of each other's needs and desires. Every stolen moment was a new exploration of their physiological differences and similarities. During one particularly intense meeting in a rarely used observation deck, they discovered that Centaurian pheromones had unexpected effects on human neural responses. The resulting experience left them both gasping and craving more. "You humans," Lixia marveled afterward, "your capacity for pleasure is extraordinary. No wonder the Council is so interested in your species." The game of cat and mouse continued, growing more elaborate with each passing day. They developed new codes, new signals, new ways to communicate their desire without words. A particular stance during meetings, a specific way of adjusting their armor, even the timing of their patrol routes. Everything became part of their secret language of lust. The station's emergency sirens blared to life at 0300 hours, jerking Steve awake in his quarters. Red warning lights pulsed through the darkness as the AI's voice echoed through the corridors. "Security breach detected in Sector 7. All security personnel report to designated stations." This is not a drill. Steve was already pulling on his armor when his comm unit crackled. "Officer White," Lixia's voice was all business, though it still sent shivers down his spine. "Multiple intruders detected in the diplomatic wing. Meeting you at Checkpoint Delta." The professional tone couldn't quite mask the underlying heat in her voice. Even in crisis, their mutual attraction simmered just below the surface. They rendezvoused at the checkpoint, both fully armed and armored. Lixia's combat suit hugged her curves in ways that momentarily distracted Steve from the crisis at hand. She caught his appreciative glance and flashed a predatory smile. "Focus, human," she purred, checking her weapon. "Though I must say, you look particularly appealing in full combat gear." "Time and place, Lixia," he growled, though his body responded to her tone. "What's the situation?" "Rogue elements from the Proxima Coalition," she reported, all business despite the heat in her eyes. "They've taken Ambassador Thex hostage, demanding access to the station's central database. They moved us through the corridors in perfect sync, their bodies unconsciously attuned to each other's movements. Every brush of armor against armor, every shared glance, sparked with their usual electricity, but now channeled into laser-sharp focus. The first firefight caught them in a narrow service corridor. Plasma bolts sizzled past as they dove for cover. Steve found himself pressed against Lixia behind a power conduit, their bodies fitting together with familiar perfection. "Just like old times," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear, "though usually we're removing armor, not using it as protection." "Less talking, more shooting," he replied, though he couldn't help noticing how her combat stance highlighted her athletic form. They worked their way toward the diplomatic wing, their usual physical chemistry translating into lethal efficiency. Where one moved, the other covered. When one advanced, the other provided suppressing fire. Their intimate knowledge of each other's bodies and movements proved surprisingly tactical. "You know," Lixia commented as they cleared another section, "watching you in action is almost as exciting as our usual activities." She dispatched a hostile with elegant precision. "Almost." The crisis reached its peak in the main conference room. Ambassador Thex was surrounded by armed insurgents, their weapons trained on the diplomat's crystalline form. Steve and Lixia took position outside, their bodies humming with adrenaline and their usual mutual attraction. "We need a distraction," Steve whispered, his mind racing through options. Lixia's eyes gleamed with mischief. "I have an idea. Remember that thing we discovered about Centaurian pheromones? Here now?" His body reacted instantly to the memory. "Trust me," she smirked. "My species can do some interesting things with biochemistry when we need to." What followed was perhaps the most unorthodox hostage rescue in station history. Lixia's controlled release of pheromones affected not only the human insurgents, but created an unexpected reaction with their weapons' power cells. The resulting confusion gave Steve the opening he needed. The firefight was intense but brief. When it was over, Ambassador Thex was safe, the insurgents were in custody, and Steve found himself struggling to control his response to Lixia's lingering pheromones. "Interesting tactical choice," he managed, his voice rough with suppressed desire. "Effective, though, wasn't it?" She stepped closer, her own breathing uneven. "The way you moved in there, I don't think I've ever wanted you more." "Report to debrief in 10 minutes," the station AI announced, breaking the moment. They shared a look of pure frustrated desire before heading to the command center. The debrief was torture. Every movement, every glance between them crackled with their usual intensity, now amplified by combat adrenaline and lingering pheromones. Ambassador Thex noticed, of course. Their crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. Most impressive teamwork, they noted. Your unique dynamic clearly enhances your combat effectiveness. The post-crisis debriefing seemed endless. Steve sat across from Lixia in the station's command center, both still in their combat gear, their bodies thrumming with residual adrenaline and those maddeningly effective Centaurian pheromones. Every shared glance sparked with barely contained energy. Your unconventional tactics saved lives today, Station Commander Reynolds announced, his stern features betraying a hint of amusement. Though I'm curious about the exact nature of this biochemical distraction mentioned in your preliminary report. Lixia's violet skin darkened slightly, her species equivalent of a blush. Classified Centaurian defense mechanisms, sir. I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics. Steve bit back a smile, remembering exactly how specific those defense mechanisms could be. His body certainly hadn't forgotten. Whatever it was, Ambassador Thex interjected, their crystalline form shimmering under the command center's lights. The effectiveness of your partnership is undeniable. The High Council is particularly interested in your unique dynamic. The meeting concluded with an unexpected announcement. Steve and Lixia were being assigned as a permanent security team for high-risk diplomatic functions. Their successful handling of the crisis had earned them special status and a lot more time working closely together. Well, Lixia purred as they left the command center, her hip brushing against his with deliberate intent. Looks like we'll be spending even more time together, Officer White. The corridor was empty, but the security cameras were definitely active. Steve maintained professional distance despite his body's urgent demands. We should discuss our new assignment parameters. My quarters, 10 minutes. Her voice was pure silk. The surveillance system needs routine maintenance anyway. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. When they finally reached her quarters, the pent-up energy from the firefight combined with their usual explosive chemistry. The door had barely closed before they were on each other, armor pieces clattering to the floor. Later, as they lay catching their breath, Lixia traced patterns on his chest. You humans are remarkable, she mused. The way your bodies respond to danger, to excitement, it's intoxicating. No wonder the Council is so fascinated by your species. Speaking of fascination, Steve propped himself up on an elbow. That pheromone trick during the crisis, was that standard Centaurian combat training? She laughed, the sound sending shivers down his spine. Let's just say I've been experimenting. Your particular responses to my biochemistry have been most educational. Their new assignment brought fresh challenges. During diplomatic functions, they had to maintain absolute professionalism while working in close proximity. Their mutual attraction, far from diminishing, seemed to intensify with each passing day. The Rigelian ambassador's reception proved especially challenging. Lixia wore her formal guard uniform, modified to Centaurian standards which left little to imagination while remaining technically appropriate. Steve found himself constantly distracted by the play of light on her violet skin. Focus, human, she whispered during a security sweep, her breath hot against his ear. Though I must say, your struggle for control is entertaining. You're doing this on purpose, he growled back, his body responding to her proximity despite his best efforts. Always, her smile was wicked. Consider it tactical training. If you can maintain focus around me, no other distraction will ever affect you. Their reputation grew throughout the station. The human Centaurian security team became known for their exceptional effectiveness, though few suspected the true nature of their partnership. Their secret remained their own, making each stolen moment more intense. During one particularly tense diplomatic negotiation, they were stationed at opposite ends of the conference room. Lixia spent the entire session demonstrating just how flexible Centaurian anatomy could be while maintaining perfect guard posture. Steve retaliated by executing a series of combat stances that highlighted every muscle his armor enhanced. That was cruel, she cornered him afterward in a maintenance tunnel. You know what those movements do to me. Payback, he smirked, pulling her closer. for that display during the Rogelian trade talks. Their professional success continued to draw attention. The station's administration began requesting their presence at increasingly sensitive diplomatic functions. Each assignment brought new challenges, new opportunities to test their control, new moments of barely contained desire. The Galactic Peace Summit brought unprecedented challenges to Stellar Nexus. Representatives from 23 species gathered for 2 weeks of intense negotiations, requiring absolute professionalism from all security personnel. For Steve and Lixia, it meant maintaining constant proximity while suppressing their raw attraction. 2 weeks, Lixia murmured during their pre-summit briefing. 2 weeks of watching you in that formal armor, without being able to touch. Her violet eyes darkened with desire. This might actually kill me. Focus on the job, Steve replied, though his body tensed at her proximity. We're also expected to train the auxiliary security teams. Their new status as the station's elite security team meant demonstrating combat techniques to junior officers. The training sessions became an exquisite form of torture, requiring them to maintain professional distance, while their bodies remembered every intimate encounter. The key to effective partnership, Lixia explained to their trainees, demonstrating a defensive stance that pressed her back against Steve's chest, is absolute awareness of your partner's body position. Steve struggled to maintain composure as her familiar warmth seeped through their armor. Anticipating your partner's movements becomes instinctive with enough practice. The summit's first week tested their control to its limits. During high-level negotiations, they maintained their posts at opposite ends of the conference room, each hyper-aware of the other's presence. Lixia's subtle shifts in stance drove Steve to distraction, while his combat-ready alertness had her biting her lip in frustrated desire. Between sessions, they barely managed to maintain their professional facade. Every brush in the corridors, every shared elevator ride crackled with suppressed energy. Their usual release points were off-limits due to increased security protocols. During one particularly intense training demonstration, Lixia's Centaurian biochemistry reacted unexpectedly with her heightened state of arousal. The resulting pheromone release affected not only Steve, but several nearby trainees, leading to a hastily called break in proceedings. That's never happened before, she admitted later in her quarters, during a rare moment alone. Something's different about my biochemical responses lately. Steve was too distracted by her proximity to fully register her concern. The enforced professional distance had made their stolen moments even more intense. The summit's second week brought unexpected complications. During a morning briefing, Lixia suddenly excused herself, looking uncharacteristically pale. She returned moments later, her violet skin slightly ashen. "Are you all right?" Steve whispered during their patrol. "Fine," she replied tersely. "Just some strange reactions lately, probably from suppressing my natural responses to you for so long." Their training sessions continued, becoming increasingly challenging as Lixia's condition seemed to fluctuate. Her usually perfect control over her biochemistry became erratic, leading to some interesting moments during demonstrations. The human Centaurian combat style, she explained to their fascinated trainees, relies on perfect synchronization. Her voice hitched as another wave of nausea hit her. Each partner must, "Excuse me." She rushed out, leaving Steve to continue the demonstration. When he found her later, she was consulting her personal medical scanner, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, her voice unusually serious. "Remember how the ambassador mentioned human Centaurian compatibility studies?" Steve nodded, his body automatically responding to her proximity despite her serious tone. Well, she continued, apparently they were more compatible than anyone anticipated. She showed him the scanner readings. "I'm pregnant, with what appears to be a human Centaurian hybrid." The news hit him like a plasma bolt. "That's possible?" "Apparently so." She laughed without humor. "Though it wasn't supposed to be. The biochemical reactions I've been experiencing, they're not from suppressing our usual activities. They're pregnancy symptoms." Their eyes met, mutual desire still present but now complicated by this unexpected development. Neither spoke of love or commitment. Their relationship remained purely physical, even with this new dimension. "This doesn't change anything between us," Lixia stated firmly, her hand unconsciously moving to her midsection. "Our arrangement remains what it's always been. Pure pleasure, no complications. Except now there's a rather significant complication," Steve pointed out. "A secret one," she emphasized. "One that absolutely cannot get out until I figure out how to handle it." Promise me you won't tell anyone." The station's medical bay was eerily quiet during gamma shift. Steve found himself pacing outside while Lixia underwent another series of scans. Her pregnancy was progressing faster than either human or Centaurian normal, drawing unwanted attention from the medical staff. "Fascinating," Dr. Reeves muttered, reviewing the latest results. "The hybrid cellular structure is unlike anything in our database. And these hormone levels..." She glanced at Lixia. Have you noticed any unusual biochemical reactions lately?" Steve tensed, remembering how Lixia's enhanced pheromones had nearly caused a diplomatic incident during yesterday's security briefing. Her pregnancy had amplified her natural biochemistry to unprecedented levels, making their mutual attraction almost unbearable. "Nothing significant," Lixia lied smoothly, though her eyes flickered to Steve. The look sent a jolt through his body, despite his concern for her condition. After the doctor left, Steve moved closer to the examination bed. "You should tell them about the biochemical changes. It might be important." "And reveal our secret?" Lixia's violet skin flushed darker. "Besides, the only significant reactions happen around you." Her voice dropped to a whisper that made his pulse race. "Though they're getting more intense." He found himself reaching for her hand without thinking, then caught himself. This wasn't part of their arrangement. They didn't do tender gestures or emotional support. Their relationship was purely physical, wasn't it? "The medical staff is getting suspicious," he said, forcing himself to step back. "They're requesting detailed genetic samples to study the hybrid pregnancy." "Let them be suspicious," Lixia stretched, her movement deliberately sensual despite her condition. "They won't find anything unless they know exactly what to look for, and the only other human-Centaurian coupling they could study is..." She gestured between them. The pregnancy had changed something between them, though neither would admit it. Their encounters, while still driven by raw desire, had taken on an unfamiliar tenderness. Steve found himself watching Lixia not just with lust, but with an unsettling protectiveness he refused to analyze. During their security rounds, he noticed how she unconsciously touched her slightly swelling abdomen, the gesture stirring something in him that went beyond physical attraction. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on how her pregnancy-enhanced pheromones made him want to drag her into the nearest maintenance shaft. "Your biochemistry is affecting the entire security team," he commented during one patrol. 3 cadets failed their combat training because they couldn't focus when you were in the room." She smirked, though something softer flickered in her eyes. "Jealous, human? Don't worry, the full effect only works on you." She moved closer, her familiar scent now carrying new intoxicating notes. "Though I must admit, these new reactions are interesting." Their professional duties became increasingly challenging. Lixia's pregnancy-enhanced biochemistry made their usual physical attraction nearly overwhelming, while also triggering unexpected protective instincts in Steve that he struggled to suppress. During one diplomatic function, a minor security threat sent Steve into an almost berserker rage when the suspect moved too close to Lixia. His reaction surprised them both. It went far beyond professional concern or even their usual physical possessiveness. "Nah, that was unnecessary," Lixia confronted him afterward in her quarters. "I'm pregnant, not helpless. I don't need you to..." She trailed off as he stepped closer, their bodies automatically responding to each other's proximity. "I know you don't need protection," he growled, fighting the urge to touch her. "It was instinct, nothing more." "Instinct," she repeated, her voice husky. "Like how I can sense your presence across a room now? Like how I know exactly what you're feeling?" Her hand moved to her abdomen. "These changes in my biochemistry, they're creating something new between us." "Physical reactions," he insisted, though his body betrayed him by moving closer. "Enhanced pheromones affecting basic biological responses. Nothing more." She laughed, but it held an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "Of course, just biology, chemistry, like always." But they both knew something was shifting. The way he brought her supplements without being asked. The way she adjusted her guard stance to keep him in view. Small gestures that went beyond their arrangement of mutual pleasure. The medical mystery deepened as Lixia's pregnancy progressed at an accelerated rate. Dr. Reeves became increasingly persistent in her requests for genetic testing, forcing them to be creative with their medical reports. "The fetus is developing faster than either human or Centaurian norm," the doctor explained during one examination. We need to identify the father species to understand these hybrid characteristics. Classified information, Lixia responded smoothly, though her hand sought Steve's presence behind her. Centaurian diplomatic protocols. The medical emergency klaxon blared through stellar nexus's gamma shift quiet. Steve bolted awake in his quarters, instantly alert. The station's AI hadn't finished announcing medical emergency in Section 4 before he was running, knowing exactly who needed him. He found Lixia collapsed in a maintenance quarter, her violet skin almost gray with pain. Her pregnancy, accelerated beyond normal parameters, had reached a critical point weeks ahead of schedule. The baby, as she gasped, reaching for him instinctively. Something's wrong. The hybrid physiology ... Her words cut off in a grimace of pain. Steve lifted her effortlessly, their usual electric attraction now overshadowed by something deeper, more urgent. We need Dr. Reeves. No. Lixia clutched his armor. Can't reveal our secret. Damn the secret, he growled, surprising himself with the fierce protectiveness in his voice. I won't lose you. Either of you. The medical bay's doors hissed open as he burst in, carrying her. Dr. Reeves took one look at the situation and immediately activated privacy protocols. I need to know everything, the doctor demanded, running advanced scanners over Lixia's distended abdomen. No more diplomatic secrets. What species is the father? Steve stepped forward, his hand still clasped in Lixia's. Human. I'm the father. The doctor's eyes widened, but she remained professional. That explains the unusual readings. The hybrid cellular structure is causing a biochemical cascade. Her Centaurian biology is fighting the human DNA. Lixia's grip on Steve's hand tightened. The pregnancy had changed their dynamic in ways neither had anticipated. What started as pure physical attraction had evolved into something neither was ready to name. The baby's coming now, Dr. Reeves announced. The accelerated gestation has reached its peak. We need to stabilize the biochemical reaction before it overwhelms her system. The next hours were a blur of medical terminology and barely contained panic. Steve never left Lixia's side, their usual passionate energy channeled into a different kind of intensity. Talk to me, Lixia demanded between contractions, her eyes locked on his. Distract me. Tell me about the first time you saw me. You know that story, he smiled, wiping the sweat from her brow with unexpected tenderness. You were driving me crazy during that diplomatic session, deliberately catching my eye. I was assessing your potential, she managed a weak smirk. As a possible mate? Purely physical, of course. Of course, he agreed, though something in his chest tightened at her words. Just like how I was only admiring your combat stance. Their banter, usually charged with sexual tension, now carried undertones of something deeper, something both still refused to acknowledge. Biochemical readings are critical, Dr. Reeves announced. The hybrid DNA is causing unprecedented reactions. We need to stabilize her system now. Use my blood, Steve offered immediately. If the human DNA is causing problems, maybe human antibodies can help regulate it. The doctor's eyes lit up. That might actually work. The baby's human DNA came from you. Your blood might help her system accept it. What followed was an experimental procedure that had never been attempted before. Steve's blood, filtered and modified, was used to help Lixia's body cope with the hybrid birth. Throughout the procedure, their connection seemed to strengthen. Every touch, every shared look carried weight beyond their usual physical attraction. When Lixia's biochemistry stabilized, Steve felt relief so profound it scared him. Almost there, Dr. Reeves encouraged. The baby's coming now. The moment their son emerged, both parents froze in wonder. His skin was a pale lavender, lighter than Lixia's violet tone. His features were a perfect blend of human and Centaurian, beautiful in an entirely unique way. He's perfect, Lixia whispered, her usual seductive confidence replaced by raw emotion. Steve found himself reaching for both of them, drawn by something far stronger than physical desire. The baby grabbed his finger with surprising strength, and something in his chest expanded painfully. Well, Dr. Reeves said dryly, this certainly explains the unusual readings we've been getting. The first human-Centaurian hybrid. This will revolutionize our understanding of interspecies compatibility. No, Lixia said sharply, her protective instincts flaring. This stays between us. Promise me, he can't become a medical curiosity. The doctor looked between them, noting their protective stance around the child. Your secret is safe with me, though you might want to consider how long you can keep this quiet. He's rather distinctive. Looking at their son, Steve had to agree. The child was obviously neither fully human nor fully Centaurian. Their secret would eventually come out, but for now, "We'll figure it out," he said, surprising himself by using we. When had they become a unit rather than just two people satisfying mutual desire? Lixia caught his eye, and for once, their shared look wasn't charged with pure lust. Something else flickered between them, something neither was ready to name, but couldn't deny anymore. The attack came without warning. Steve was doing his routine security sweep when the station's AOI announced unauthorized access to the medical sector, exactly where Lixia and their week-old son were resting. His body moved before his mind could process. Years of training amplified by something far stronger than duty. The connection he shared with Lixia, once purely physical, now thrummed with protective urgency. He found three figures in stealth suits attempting to breach the medical bay's quarantine protocols. Their target was obvious: the unprecedented human-Centaurian hybrid who represented a breakthrough in interspecies genetics. Steve didn't hesitate. His combat training, combined with the fierce need to protect his family, and when had he started thinking of them as family, made him devastatingly effective. Inside the medical bay, he found Lixia already in action. Even recovering from childbirth, she moved with lethal grace, her maternal instincts enhancing rather than hindering her combat skills. Their son was secured in a protected incubator, his unique features peaceful despite the chaos. They fought together with their usual perfect synchronization, but now it felt different. Their movements weren't just driven by physical attraction and combat training. There was something deeper, more fundamental. "Behind you," Lixia called, her voice carrying notes he'd never heard before. Concern, fear, something else he wasn't ready to name. The fight ended quickly. Station security arrived to find 5 unconscious infiltrators in Steve and Lixia standing guard over their child, their usual professional distance forgotten in the heat of protective fury. "Genetic pirates," Commander Reynolds confirmed later, reviewing the security footage. "They've been tracking unusual medical readings across the sector. Your son's unique signature must have attracted their attention." Lixia's hand found Steve's under the conference table, their familiar electric attraction now layered with shared concern. "We need to protect him," she said, her usual seductive confidence replaced by maternal steel. "We will," Steve promised, squeezing her hand. The gesture felt natural, necessary, like their relationship had evolved beyond their careful boundaries without either noticing. Later in Lixia's quarters, they watched their son sleep. His lavender skin seemed to glow softly in the dim light, his features a perfect blend of their species. "I never wanted this," Lixia admitted softly. "A child, complications, some feelings." She turned to face Steve, her violet eyes holding unfamiliar vulnerability. "It was supposed to be just physical, simple, uncomplicated." "Was it ever really just physical?" Steve asked, voicing the question that had been growing between them. "Even at the beginning?" She laughed, but it wasn't her usual seductive purr. "I told myself it was, that humans were just fascinating on a biological level, that your responses to my biochemistry were uniquely satisfying. That's what I kept telling myself, even as I found more excuses to be near you. And now?" He stepped closer, drawn by their usual attraction, but also by something deeper, something that had been building since that first maintenance closet encounter. "Now?" She glanced at their sleeping son, then back to Steve. "Now I'm terrified, because this isn't just biochemistry anymore. This isn't just physical attraction or compatible pheromones or interesting genetic combinations." "No," he agreed, reaching for her. "It's not." Their kiss was different from the countless others they'd shared. Still passionate, still electric, but now charged with everything they'd been denying. "I love you," she whispered against his lips, then pulled back with wide eyes, as if surprised by her own admission. "Damn, that wasn't supposed to happen," Steve laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "Nothing about us was supposed to happen. A human and a Centaurian, a diplomatic security officer and an elite guard, a maintenance closet encounter that turned into this, she agreed, looking at their son. "Us, a family. When did that happen?" "Probably around the same time we stopped pretending our little secret was just about physical pleasure." Their son stirred, opening eyes that somehow combined Centaurian violet with human green. His unique features represented everything about their relationship, Unexpected, unprecedented, and perfect in its own way. "I love you too," Steve said, the words feeling right, necessary, inevitable. "Both of you." "Well," Lixia smirked, some of her old seductive confidence returning, "I suppose some secrets are worth keeping, even if they evolve into something more." "Speaking of secrets," he pulled her closer, their bodies still responding to each other with familiar heat, now enhanced rather than overshadowed by deeper emotions. "I think we've got a new one to keep." "Oh," her eyes sparkled with familiar mischief. He nuzzled her neck. "The secret that the galaxy's most successful human Centaurian security team is actually a family." She laughed, the sound full of joy and promise. "That's definitely going to raise some eyebrows in the diplomatic corps." Their son cooed, reaching for them both with tiny hands that carried hints of both their species. They moved together to comfort him, their movements as synchronized as always, but now driven by love as much as attraction. "Worth it," Lixia decided, looking at their small family. "Every risk, every secret, every moment of denial. Worth it." Steve couldn't agree more. What had started as a secret liaison in a maintenance closet had evolved into something neither of them had expected, but both now knew they couldn't live without.